I'm so happy about that. I'm not happy at all. You know, our moods, they can change quickly, can't they? Sometimes even in the flash of a moment. But we have to ask ourselves if there's anything below the surface that helps us stay sane when things go off the rails. I'm glad you're here for this conversation today. Hi, I'm Rob, and it's great to be able to catch up with you for a few moments here today. We have some interactive teaching videos that are available for kids and families. They're available on Facebook, and when you go on Facebook, there's a search for Cabin Kids that you can follow through to be able to find that resource. I'd encourage you to check them out. They're an exciting way to be able to integrate faith in your family. Now, as we look around these days, there's a lot of things to grumble about, or at least that's what we hear. There's so many people focused on what they don't have or their unmet expectations in life. They really start to get pretty grumpy. Maybe you've met some of them lately, in person or on social media. Well, sometimes we could all use a reminder that everything we have really comes from God. He's faithful to give us all we need. And even more than in the area of what we own, God provides everything we need to face the different things that happen in our lives. God's proven time and time again that we can trust Him no matter what. We can complain and become jealous about what other people have, or we can choose to respond with contentment, knowing that God has a plan for our lives. So let's jump in and take a closer look. Bungee jumping can be an absolutely incredible experience. Now, for some, they would say, there's absolutely no way I would ever consider it. But when you come to the point where you're ready to actually jump, there's so many places you've already said, you know what, I'm going to trust this. I'm going to trust this platform. I'm going to trust the people that are helping me. I'm going to trust all of what's about to happen. And as crazy as it may seem to trust life and limb to what seems like just a large colored rubber band, at that moment, the simple trust of the jump and the cord is what you're left with. Now, we make hundreds and hundreds of trust decisions every day, some of them so small that lead up to what looks like a very large decision. So many, sometimes, that we don't even think about them. We trust our information sources, where we get our news or weather. We trust our institutions, our banks, our schools, the medical groups that we're a part of. We trust our experts, like our doctors or our mechanics. And there's lots of times that even though we have people that we trust, we still may have struggled with trust. But we all know that life is better when we begin to grow and our life decisions and our relationships get increasingly seasoned with trust. Now, Paul is showing us how critical trust is to really being genuinely happy. Because we all want to be happy. When we just think about happy in our lives, we want happy from life. We want to be happy in life. What if being truly, deeply happy is something that goes beyond a cool moment or a series of moments, and if it really starts with trust as well? Let's see what Paul has to say about this in Philippians chapter 4, verses 10 through 14. How I praise the Lord that you are concerned about me again. I know that you have always been concerned for me, but didn't have the chance to help me. Not that I was ever in need, for I have learned how to be content with whatever I have. I know how to live on almost nothing or with everything. I've learned the secret of living in every situation, whether it is with a full stomach or empty, with plenty or little, for I can do everything through Christ who gives me strength. Even so, you have done well to share with me in my present difficulty. Now, as we think about what it takes for Paul to be happy, or as he refers to it, to be content, he shares what is arguably one of the most popular and maybe one of the most quoted verses in the Bible. You see it on coffee mugs and social media and all over the place. It consistently lands in the top 10 of people's favorite Bible verses, and it should be because it is such a great verse. It says, "For I can do everything through Christ who gives me strength." But this verse can often get turned around in our minds, can't it? We can misinterpret it to mean, I can do anything I want through Him who gives me strength. So as a result, someone who wants a new car but maybe can't afford one or can't deal with the payments goes ahead and buys something they really can't and maybe shouldn't take the risk on and says, well, I can do everything through Christ who gives me strength. Or the student who hasn't even studied for the test covers for slacking off and says, I can do this test through Christ who gives me strength. Sometimes even preachers will quote this verse and tell you that you can get anything you want because the Bible says, I can do all things through Him who gives me strength. Now, fortunately, this verse doesn't say you can get all you want, because at the root of us, we're all pretty selfish people, and that would create a bit of a nightmare world if people could just kind of demand everything that they wanted, even though some try. And at the end of the day, we still find ourselves asking, well, how is this influencing my happiness in life? Well, this passage really starts out with Paul kind of walking a bit of a tightrope here. He's thankful and full of gratitude for the consistent concern of the people in Philippi. And they now, more recently, have had an opportunity to show it. And there were a lot of challenges to be able to help someone who was in prison, let alone if they were in a prison in your same town. But at the time that Paul wrote this, he's in a prison 800 to 1,000 miles away from their city. So they had to send someone and take more than a month-long journey to get to where Paul was to deliver the gifts that they had in mind for him. And he was very grateful and thankful for their care, although he is quick to clarify he's not fishing for more. And he continues to talk about some of his adventures as he expresses how he has learned happiness. Now, he has quite a few adventures, and some of those you may have read about before. I mean, he's been shipwrecked. We know he was beaten. He was yelled at. He had stones thrown at him and almost killed him. And at this point, he's in prison. And prison would be kind of a creepy experience to start with, right? Let alone a Roman prison. I mean, that would elevate it to absolutely super creepy as an experience. And Paul refers to it in verse 14 as his present difficulty. Now, he's in this moment, and he's seasoned with a confidence and trust and gratitude in Jesus. Now, you would think, well, of course, this is the Apostle Paul. I mean, after all, I'm not at all like him. Well, that's probably a good thing that you aren't. But it's critical to understand that Paul expresses to us that he learned this contentment. And that is so important because our lives don't look like Paul's life, but we can learn this too because it's the same God who taught him that will help us to learn based on who we are and based on who Jesus is. So we can all go on the journey to live with an increasing happiness, or as Paul refers to it, contentment. A happiness where outward circumstances do not determine our attitude. Boy, wouldn't it be great if we all learned that, right? So if we want to grow in that kind of life, a life that is happy, a happiness that's not dependent on our circumstances, and confident when things are completely uncertain, and at ease, even in the crazy moments in life, wouldn't it be important to sort out what some key indicators are or where we start? What do we really need to know in order to have that kind of happy in our lives? There's a story that's told of a group of geography students who were studying the 7 wonders of the world. At the end of the lecture, the students were asked to list what they considered to be the present day 7 wonders of the world. Although there was some disagreement, the 7 items that eventually rose to the top of their list were the Great Pyramids of Egypt, the Taj Mahal, the Grand Canyon, the Panama Canal, the Empire State Building, St. Peter's Basilica, and the Great Wall of China. Now, as the teacher was gathering all of the votes, they noted one student, a quiet young girl, who hadn't turned in her paper yet, and so she very wisely asked the girl if she was having difficulty with her list. And the girl replied, "Well, yeah, actually a little. I couldn't quite make up my mind because there were so many possibilities." Well, the teacher said, "Share with us what you have and maybe we can be of help together." So the girl hesitated, but then she said, "I think the 7 wonders of the world are to touch, to taste, to see, and to hear." She paused for a moment and then continued, "to hope, and to laugh, and to love." And the room became so silent, it was deafening. This girl had discovered what Paul is seeking to share with us, that it's often easy for us to look at the things that we do and refer to them as wonderful and wondrous. It's sometimes harder to see some of the everyday things that God has given to us and to have the kind of gratitude that we could have for them. And Paul says that's part of him learning to be content. He went on this journey to discover the contented or the happy life. He went from being unhappy to discovering what it meant to be content, meaning that he learned how to be happy with a happiness that wasn't dependent on his circumstances, with a confidence when things were completely uncertain, and an ease even in the crazy moments of life. So does this mean that Paul would be one of those kind of Neverland type characters, that is almost disconnected from life with no real ability to really relate to people around him? I've met some people like that. Maybe you have too. They don't seem like they're completely real, do they? One of the ways when we were teenagers we used to say is that they look like they might have slept with a coat hanger in their mouth. Their smile is endless. But there are times when it feels like they have no empathy, that bad things happen and they're like, "No, well, no problem. I'm still happy." Well, that may not be true contentment. It may actually be a shady substitute of indifference. Indifference comes to us sometimes in ways like we say we don't care, but ultimately it can also come to us in ways where we're like, "Well, that's no big deal," and we quickly cast things away that really are a big deal. Or it can also become a shady substitute of fatalism, where we say, "Well, there's nothing I can do. That's just the way it is." But there are often times that God calls us to action. There's also the shady substitute of self-sufficiency that can be deceptive when we start to look to our own resources and all of the things within us to be able to figure things out and to just stay content. Doesn't relying on God's resources make so much more sense? So being happy or content really starts with a focus of gratitude and trust in God. And as we start with that trust and gratitude, we grow in confidence and in trust, and life continues to become increasingly seasoned with trust and gratitude in our lives. And Paul references how that makes a key difference in so many areas of our lives. But we often see it showing up in our approach to provision, because he's someone who understands this. I mean, he's working with very little. He's an itinerant preacher who works on the side and preaches as his main gig. Now, ultimately, he's understood what it means to work with little. But he also understands what it means to work with much, maybe from an earlier time in his life. And our approach to provision helps us to see that sometimes it's pretty easy for us to be happy when things are good. But it's harder to be thankful for God's provision when you feel like it's not enough or when times are hard. But our approach to provision is a key indicator in our lives. Also, the way we deal with circumstances is another key indicator. God is present and He extends beyond tragedy. God is present and He extends beyond great blessing. And Paul has witnessed this in so many areas of his life. But when people come to us and they ask us how we're doing, and when it's in that moment where right there in the front of our brains they ask that question, we say good, but ultimately there's that nagging, pounding reality that is right there just beating us up. It's hard to be content because things are not going well and that's all we can think of. It's even harder sometimes when things are going great for others and they're not going so well for us. So how we deal with circumstances is really an indicator of our contentment, of our trust and gratitude in Jesus. And then he also helps us to see that the source of strength and where we see our strength is a key indicator. Ultimately, there is strength that we understand when it comes to being content. And we can sometimes say to ourselves, well, I'm just going to put my mind towards being content. But then there is a strength that passes all of our understanding. I'm going to trust the one who is empowering me. Because when we talk about strength, really what we're referring to is who gets the credit for how things happen in our lives. Some of us worked today, and our health, our strength, our ingenuity, do we remind ourselves that that is a gift from God, or do we take it for granted? Who do we think about when we talk about our day, our money, our energy, our insights in life, our reputation in the community? Is it all about our strength and our credit, or is it about the strength and the credit that I can give to God? And in the midst of all of this, there's a wild statement that we often hear. It comes out of people all the time. It's a statement that you've heard in our culture many, many times. God won't give you more than you can handle. Well, ultimately, when we come in contact with a statement like this, there's one piece that is missing, and that piece is without Him. This is true only if you include God in the conversation. God won't give you more than you can handle without Him in the equation, because God is the one who helps us be content. And Paul is living it out, and he's expressing it here, saying no matter what my circumstances, no matter what my difficulties I may face, no matter how challenging the road is that is ahead of me, I know God will give me the strength as I need it to make it through. Whether I have all the same stuff as everybody else, whether my options are many or whether they're few, I can handle everything I encounter through Him who gives me the strength to go on. Because of who Jesus is, I can navigate everything I face in Him. Now, Paul helps us to see that this is something Jesus taught him over time. And that, as I mentioned before, should be encouraging to us because it's God who can help us to be happy or content. And it's not just about self-talk and how we'll just focus our minds on making that choice, or it's not a mantra that we just live in the moment and forget about everything that's behind us and just press forward. Well, we can know all of this in our heads, but we can still struggle to put it into practice in our lives. So, as we love and follow Jesus and ask Him to help us in this moment, it's to experience gratitude and trust in parenting, in banking, in shopping, in meals, in driving, in illness, in grief. As I love and follow You, Jesus, help me in this moment to live in the confident awareness of the present reality that You're with me. This becomes a way that our hearts are focused on a seasoned life of trust and gratitude with God. So today, if this is a road that you wish to explore, I have a few questions for you to consider. One question would be, when is it hardest for you to be content? This may be a question you want to write down and consider in your quiet time with God, or in a moment where you might be cruising along and thinking about some of the things that are derailing you as it relates to contentment. When is it hardest to be content? And then secondly, how would gratitude help me be happier? How would gratitude help my contentment? Where are the places where maybe I'm overlooking some of the things that God has provided for me, or taking them for granted because they're just so average or normal to me that I don't even see them anymore? So it's clear that really this all starts with gratitude and trust. And as gratitude and trust grows, they continue to become seasoned in our lives. So the question today for us to conclude with is, where are we learning to be content? Just before we celebrate communion together and pray together, let me just remind you of the podcast extras. They continue to assist us as we worship at home and continue to journal with a variety of questions that help us to process what God is doing in our lives, in addition to the questions that you heard today. There are also some links to our church that you'll find. This link is embedded into the description box in both YouTube and Facebook, and it will take you to our Kingston Standard Church website and allow you to interact with that material there. I trust you've had an opportunity to get some elements so that we can share in communion together, and here over the next few minutes as we take some time to focus our hearts and minds on the death and resurrection of Jesus, we're reminded of how grateful we are for what God has done for us and in us. And as we continue to trust Him, we acknowledge that we need to continue to grow and learn and discover what it means to live life completely centered and reorganized around who Jesus is and His teaching. And so we're reminded as we think about communion of the night that Jesus was betrayed. When we think about all of the events of that evening, it's hard to imagine how things unfolded and how chaotic they really were. Here's Jesus celebrating the Passover meal with His disciples, and He pulls out some bread, which to that point has really reflected the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt. And now He's saying, I'm bringing new meaning to this. It's meaning that says, this is now my body, which is broken for you. And when you eat it, I long for you to remember what I am doing for you this night. What a poignant moment that would have been. Let's consider that as we eat together. A little later on in the evening, Jesus took a cup and He said, "This is a new covenant in my blood. And when you drink this, remember what I have given to you. Remember that this is a brand new way of approaching life." The beauty of that, the reality of that, let that sink in as we drink together. Jesus, we are genuinely grateful for all You've done for us. The chaos and the panic and the anxiety of that night, it's hard for us to imagine. It's impossible for us to genuinely appreciate what You went through. But we thank You for how You did it so willingly for us. May we never recover from the gratitude and trust that we can have in You as a result of how faithful You are, as a result of how good you are. And we are so thankful for who you are and that you're at work in our lives. And so, God, today, as we think about what it means to be happy, ultimately we thank you for how you taught Paul to really understand what it meant to be content. It was something below the surface that wasn't determined by his mood at a particular point in time. It went beyond circumstances and provision and really gave you credit for strength. So God, today as we kind of process all of what that means in our lives, we know we want to be happy. And so I pray that you would help us with that happiness that doesn't depend on all of our circumstances, that goes beyond a mood in our lives, that runs deep below the surface and really comes from the confidence and trust and gratitude we have in you. Help us to see places where we're being derailed in being happy because of the contentment that we really need to find in you. Help us to see places where we need to discover how to be grateful for what you're doing and how that can revolutionize our journey of happiness. We thank you. We praise you for the way that you will teach us. In your name I pray. Amen. Thanks again for taking a few moments to share this time together today. Before you go, if you don't mind taking just a moment to like, comment, or share this video, it's always an encouragement to us when you do, and we are grateful for those of you who follow through on that. If you haven't taken the time to subscribe to our YouTube channel or to like or follow us on Facebook, on our Facebook page, then I'd encourage you to follow through on that action just at the conclusion of this video as well, so that you can keep updated on future posts along the way. As always, we're praying for you. We trust you're praying for us as well, and we'll see you all again soon.